Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Future of the Yoga Teacher. I'm Jacob Kyle. I'm the Director of Embodied Philosophy. If you've been paying attention to the last couple panel discussions, you'll notice that today I've opted out of the green screen because, as you could see, I wasn't very good at working with the green screen, and whatever was in the background was actually coming through my eyes, making me look either totally crazy or incredibly scary. So I'm waiting until I've got somebody who can actually implement that technology efficiently before I try using it again. So we're here for panel 3 of this 5-part panel series on the future of the yoga teacher. But before we get into all of that, I'd like to just introduce or mention a little bit about embodied philosophy before we get started. So for those of you that are newer to our platform. So Embodied Philosophy is an online community, and it's an educational platform for Eastern philosophies and practices. We publish a range of content. We have our podcast called Chit Heads, that's CHIT, which means consciousness in Sanskrit, in which I interview leaders, scholars, and teachers from the Eastern philosophy community. We present online courses, conferences, and seminars, all of which you can learn about on our website at embodiedphilosophy.com. There are 2 new courses that are starting next week. Let me just move to show you the images for those. So the first course that's launching is called Yogini, and that is on the iconography and philosophy of yoginis and divine feminine power. So we'll be looking at yoginis as we find them in the tantric traditions of India and Nepal, and also their mandalas and the practices and rituals that are associated with them. Lots of very kind of empowering practices for our time. And so even though they're quite ancient, very relevant for today. So if you're interested in that, go to embodiedphilosophy.com/yogini. And then the second course, so that's launching next Tuesday. And then the second course we have happening is launching on Thursday, and that is Tibetan Buddhism, A Path of Becoming Fully Human. This course is a 4-week course taught by Dr. Miles Neal, and it's exploring the philosophy and the symbolism and the practices of Tibetan Buddhism and the ways that they can enrich our lives today. So that is taking place on Thursday, or it's beginning on Thursday, and you can find out more about that by going to embodiedphilosophy.com/Tibetan. You can leave out the Buddhism, just /Tibetan. Okay, so we also are launching, or we also have a journal called Tarka, which is actually a very new journal launched last week, and it is at the moment we have 3 sort of back issues, which are newly organized issues of our past content. So content that we've previously published now in a new kind of engaging format. Our first issue of Tarka that will be all new content is going to be launched on August 15th. We also have a private Facebook group called Embodied Philosophy Forum. So in order to join that, you can just go to the Facebook search bar, search Embodied Philosophy Forum, and click join. We also have a weekly e-zine that has just been reimagined and re-envisioned and launched this week as well. It's called Voices, and it features writings by members of our community reflecting on their experiences in life on the path of wisdom. So there are many ways to learn with us and to get involved, so if any of that piques your interest, just check out embodiedphilosophy.com. All right, so let's get on to the panel for today. So as I mentioned, this is Future of the Yoga Teacher. It is a 5-part panel series, and this is the 3rd panel. If you missed the first 2, you can go back and watch those on our Facebook page. They'll be up for some time. Our mission with these conversations is to highlight 5 different ways that yoga teachers are taking their teaching practice beyond the fitness studio model and into domains of expertise and specialization that are changing lives both individually and collectively. Our hope is that these conversations will inspire existing and future yoga teachers to think outside the 200-hour teacher training box and take action to use their teaching as a tool of transformation on a variety of levels. So please, those of you who are with us here, first I'd like to ask that you please like and share this conversation so that people can access these insights of our really inspired speakers. So now let me introduce today's guests. So I should also say that this is actually this part of the discussion was recorded after the live session, because in the initial live session I actually had made an error and there was no audio. So I'm re-recording this intro section. So this is now going to be mapped onto or edited onto the live video. So let me just introduce our guest. So Matthew J. Taylor was trained in the U.S. Army Baylor University Master of Physical Therapy program in 1980 and 1981. He spent 8 years as an active duty as a physical therapist with a burn management in a theater of operations specialty. Matt has 37 years as a leader in integrative rehabilitation and is the editor of the graduate textbook Fostering Creativity in Rehabilitation. From 1988 to 2003, he owned a sports medicine physical therapy clinic with a medical gym in a town of 3,500. His doctorate in 2001 to 2005 focused on group instruction using yoga-based principles for chronic spine pain. He is past president of the board of directors of IAYT, chair of their rehab community, and teaches nationally on business development for yoga therapists. He is on the IAYT PubMed Indexed Research Journals editorial board. He regularly consults with health professionals interested in utilizing yoga therapy and had his own cash-based yoga rehab clinic from 2004 to 2016 in Scottsdale, Arizona. Matt is also the top yoga injury expert witness in the U.S. and is passionate about ahimsa risk management in yoga. Presently, he's authored a book for yoga professionals titled Yoga Therapy as a Creative Response to Pain. Now, Diana, our other guest today, is a physical therapist, yoga teacher, and mother. She completed her yoga teacher training at Om Yoga in 2010. She received her bachelor's degree in biology from American University and her master's in physical therapy from Hunter College, where she continues on as an adjunct professor and researcher. Diana is the co-founder and co-director of Three's Physio Yoga Method, which also known as TPM. TPM is dedicated to teaching yoga teachers applied anatomy and kinesiology and bridging the gap through advanced teacher training between yoga teachers and the healthcare industry. TPM also educates physical therapists and other medical professionals on the benefits and integration of yoga practices into traditional Western medicine. Her teaching and treating philosophy is to combine yoga and physical therapy to provide patients and clients with relief from pain, knowledge about their body, posture reconditioning, and a healthy way to attain and maintain mental focus and balance, muscular and joint health, physical fitness, strength, and flexibility. She is driven by addressing injury by looking at the whole body and mind for the root cause of pain or discomfort and treating that root using mindfulness, breath, awareness, education, and alignment. So with that, please help me welcome Matthew J. Taylor and Diana Zotos Florio. And as I mentioned, the actual live version of this video there was no audio up until about this point. So my initial question was lost, and also the first few seconds of Diana's answer are lost. So we're gonna hear Diana basically mid-sentence, but I wanted to share what the question was, which was essentially, do you see yoga as a form of physical therapy?
I find my usage of yoga as a lens or a framework of how I myself administer physical therapy. So I take into account the 8 limbs. I take into account the yamas and the niyamas in my personal practice with my patients in the one-on-one setting. I take into account the ahimsa, and I try to stay truthful to what I'm doing. I think not all physical therapists may see it as a lens in which they administer physical therapy, but I also think they might see it as something that they use as a complementary modality within how they administer physical therapy. So a set of tools that they could use on the side and pull in when they feel like it's appropriate, right? My physical therapy hat is heavy when I'm treating a post-op ACL reconstruction patient. For myself, I can't separate the yoga. However, for someone who's not as experienced or comfortable in yoga, who's just recently graduated from a teacher training program, that's also a physical therapist, maybe they don't see that post-op ACL reconstruction patient through the lens of yoga, and they aren't going to administer the breath work and the mindfulness as frequently and as lucidly as I might. think that's the best answer I can give you on that question.
Yeah. So, so those for those that are watching, I've just found out because I've received a text message from my project manager who said that there was no sound, so they missed my question. Now there's sound. They missed my question, which was I was asking Diana, is yoga a form of physical therapy? So now we'll go ahead and ask that same question now to Matthew. Hello, Matthew.
Hello, Jacob. You got me?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. Well, I would certainly echo Diana's response. I think it's interesting because to even have the question posed reflects a
Yeah.
struggle that we're having in physical therapy as to what is a physical therapist and our whole PR thing. It's been 37 years I've watched us struggle to be somebody other than people that walk people in walkers or do ultrasounds. So I think there's some confusion there in society. I think the other another way to say the same thing that Diana just said is that quite literally physical therapy and yoga come from two totally different paradigms or worldviews. And at SITAR, the IAYT's annual research conference last June, Dr. Ananda Bhavani gave an excellent keynote speech, and he came up with some language that I think is really fun. And that is, he asked, are you doing yoga therapy or are you doing yogapathy? Yogapathy being
What is the
yoga
distinction
too.
between those two?
Yeah, so yogapathy would be the physical therapy medical model of there's pathology, and we use these technologies and tools, as Diana mentioned, as complements or lenses of how we see things, but it's still in yogapathy to address, in PT, it's to address dysfunction, impairment, pain, those sorts of things. Yoga, from a classical standpoint, would be, no, it's really actually about health and enlightenment and a spiritual technology. And we use the body and you get some nice offshoots, but it's not so much used to address it and fix pathology. That's a Western model, and neither is right or wrong, but it helps to clarify. I think if we set that out, and then like Diana said, then I can put on my lenses as a yoga therapist, or I can put on my lenses as a PT. And I guess the other way I like to say it is that there are aspects of physical therapy that the yoga-like perspective is maybe the future, some part of the future of physical therapy, in that as physical therapists are recognizing and addressing how do we bring in the other aspects of being a human, the emotional, the psychosocial, the spiritual. And so there's a movement that way. So there's this crossover. So it's kind of like that, two different worldviews. You can move between the lenses, you can blend the lenses, but it's important to understand physical therapy is pathology-based. Yoga ideally is more a health model. It's towards health and well-being versus pathology. So.
Well, thank you, Matthew. Yeah, I mean, I feel like actually, in a nutshell, you answered most of my questions for this panel. So we can all go home. So, now to just, since we did sort of miss the beginning part of that, and this is sort of basically the same question but asked in a slightly different way, but, what is the relationship between yoga and physical therapy? And we'll just continue to kind of approach this from a variety of different angles. So, Diana, how do you see that relationship?
Yeah, I can echo many of the things that Matthew discussed, and am truly happy that he spoke about the differences as the pathological model and the wellness and health being model. And ideally, that's where we're coming from. And ideally, I don't think we're reaching that ideal in the yoga world. And I think you always get those students that come to you after class with their pathology and ask for the answers, whether or not you're a physical therapist and you're just a yoga teacher. And I don't think that ideal is happening. And that's where Matt and I know that we could talk about risk management. I think the relationship between yoga and PT, and the relationship I strive to help to pave for yoga and PT, is one of a healthcare continuum. I look at other models like that exist in the healthcare world right now, and that being where we see the continuum from rehab professional to perhaps a instructor in Pilates or an acupuncturist or a personal trainer who specializes in functional movement. And I'd like to see a section of yoga teachers who have a more developed skill set to provide the skills needed to help someone who's moving through a physical therapy program to strengthen that program with yoga. So perhaps they're seeing concomitantly with their physical therapist, and they're peppering in all the yoga aspects, including breath work and mindfulness, that will help strengthen their yoga program. Or perhaps they're working with a physical therapist as the physical therapist is deciding to plan a discharge plan for that patient. And there's an open level of communication where the yoga teacher has acquired the language to speak with the physical therapist so that discharge planning can happen, and they can work with a symbiotic relationship to bring this person back to yoga or begin yoga as part of their rehab. That's my ideal, and like I said, something I'm trying to forge in what I do.
Yeah, so I hear, you saying there, it sort of sounds like a more kind of a traditional communicative relationship between specialists where, you would get a physical therapist would see their patient and then send his sort of insights to the yoga teacher and sort of vice versa, and there would be kind of an ongoing communication there, which as far as I've seen, in my own yoga teaching career, that doesn't really happen so much. There isn't a kind of exchange going on.
That's right.
Yeah. So same question, Matthew, how do you see that relationship between yoga and physical therapy?
Well, I think what we can also do is look at, because basically we're talking about an interprofessional relationship.
Right.
And that's kind of the buzzword in healthcare these days. A lot of buzzword and not much action. So we did an all-day training session at Sitar this year in the rehab section, and an entire day. Usually we just do a half a day. And what we did was we took a mix of professions and yoga therapists. The room was probably 35, 40 yoga therapists, and then the rest were PTs, OTs, speech, medical doctors, psychologists, that kind of thing. And we literally practiced communicating in a way that each party could understand the values and the limitations of their scopes of practice. And so I'm encouraged, right now I'm a consultant for the Yoga Alliance and getting this, their new venture on the scope of services, they're calling it, I guess, instead of scope of practice. But scope of services is trying to outline more clearly, like you said, beyond the 200-hour idea, what are the limits and what are the opportunities for a yoga teacher. And then when that's set out and people have some clarity around it, then it gives you a way to dialogue back and forth. And I guess one of the funny things I've said through the years is, because I'll hear PTs talking about, they're trying to be physical therapists, and I'll hear yoga teachers going, those PTs, they just hurt people and are too hard on them. And I think it's just curious that the yoga teachers can move way better than most PTs I ever saw.
Yeah, right.
But the PTs can describe the movement way better than most of the yoga teachers, And so it's such a rich field that I think there's a huge opportunity.
But on that, what is that? Is that, what is the culture there that makes the yoga teacher be able to, embody the movement that the physical therapist can describe, more efficiently, but yet can't inhabit that movement themselves?
Well, I don't know, Diana. You got.
Yeah. Well, I would go across the board and say one doesn't always mean the other. I think you get a higher percentage of better movers in the yoga world. Probably, I've not seen a stat on it, but I'm going to say that there's the majority of yoga teachers that I know come from a dance background, or they come from a more athletic background. I think you do get athletes in a physical therapy background. But I think most PTs think a little differently than yoga teachers. We like structure. We like boxes. We like learning a method. And the outlier PTs are the ones, I think, like myself and my partners, who find other ways and can have that kinesthetic awareness and then describe it. And that's where you get the real power, to be able to do both. And I think and Matt, tell me if I'm wrong, but the PT students that I've been teaching recently, there are more and more people with a yoga background, dance background, and people who are more aware, more kinesthetically, and more open to everything. And the crop of new PTs that we're growing, I think, is the best yet in terms of embodying many of these yoga principles and movement properties that we're looking for.
So does it seem then like the world, the culture that sees, a more central place for things like yoga and different movement modalities, is the presence of that, do you think, is that sort of in turn transforming the culture of physical therapy? If I can speak of it as a culture. I don't know if that's even appropriate.
Yeah, why not? Is it? I think so. Yeah, I do think so.
I'm having the same experience, Diana, that the new students get it. You don't have to tell them that, hey, the mind and the body are connected. It's just like, well, duh. So it's
finally there. It's only took 5,000 years.
Yeah, exactly.
So let me ask you now, because as you both know, the history of yoga is oftentimes one of an ascetic practice where oftentimes extreme physical posture is used as a way to achieve a kind of state of mental or spiritual transcendence that wouldn't exactly be aligned with, notions of health and wellness that have become so central to ideas around yoga and physical therapy. So with that, being the history, where, from your perspective, does this idea of yoga and physical therapy being aligned or in some way complementary to each other come from? Do you want to answer that, Matthew?
Well, I guess from my own personal history, it was just kind of stumbling on it and finding it myself as a PT that was a back care expert who had a crummy back, and happened to hire a yoga teacher in the mid-90s that was a special ed high school teacher that never touched me, never evaluated me, never did anything special for me. I just went to class, and 2 months later I was better. Amazing. And so it's like, crap. There's something wrong in my model, And so I think it's interesting because as we look at what, a lot of people coin what's going on, and particularly in the U.S., is modern postural yoga, right? Very asana focused. It speaks back to what we were talking about earlier, how we kind of get immersed in our own culture and our cultural bias of action doing. So it's very much more a ha practice than a ta practice, right? Yeah. And but it's also cultural in that our culture is a taker, we're a consumer, and which is a form of violence when it comes to I think, a teaching relationship or a rehabilitation relationship. And so I think we're needing to look at it from both professions and ask what's really empowering, because now we changed the language to, in physical therapy, it's now patient-centered care. And in the past, it was more therapist-centered care. I knew what was wrong with you, and I'll tell you what's wrong with you, and then I'll tell you how you should be and show you how you should be, and maybe even move you how you should move, which are all pretty aggressive. But now we're saying, no, get the patient involved, get them so they understand. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing in the whole guru mess and the power dynamic messes that we're seeing in yoga too, that we're all wrestling with these cultural power relationships, and the symptom of maybe an overzealous tapas yoga practice and the symptom of a directive fear-based physical therapy practice they're at the far end of the bad polarity. And then you also have people on both ends doing the positive. So I think it's this cultural thing.
Yeah, nice answer. So, Diana, do you have any thoughts on that? On this sort of, I don't know what the question is really, but the when, when do we start to see this transition from something like an ascetic practice to a practice aligned with, principles of physical therapy or health in the body?
I think if you asked me to share my opinion before Matt spoke,
Sorry.
because right now I'm stuck down the Matt hole. Like I can't get out. That happens to me sometimes. I just need a few days to unpack that one. So if I was to come out of that, I think that if we look at the system of yoga and we looked at this, the Vedantic system of the koshas, and I thought this might be where Matt might go, but if we look at the system of the koshas and the layers and of obtaining transcendence through peeling away and balancing and harmonizing the koshas, then for me, that's how it makes sense in my brain as physical therapists who are evolving, and we're attending to the physical body now. Always, and now we're more so attending to the breath body and using the breath and the life force and rebalancing that with tools like diaphragmatic breathing and taking someone out of an accessory breathing pattern. And then if we're attending to the mind-body kosha and we are breaking down some skaras and using modern pain science to try to drive new neuroplastic changes, then maybe we can think of it as an overlapping in that way that will help us bring to a transcendence in that deepest layer of the koshas.
Yeah, I guess that's what I kind of, as I see what you guys are doing, Diana, that's what the three physios are up to, is you're filling that gap for us. And I think
that's
really
it. That's it. The gap.
Yeah.
So,
I have something. And I can't wait to tell Jennifer about the mat hole, Diana.
I know the mat hole.
I'm sure she'll appreciate it.
I'm definitely experiencing that myself. I'm like, what's next? What's happening? Where am I?
No.
So,
but I think it's. Let me, if I could bridge into
yes,
this, because I think it's appropriate. Okay. So I'm on the task force for non-pharmacological pain management and opioid addiction for the yoga therapist, and so and I'm on a committee with someone from the APTA who's also on that task force, and we're asking how do we use non-pharmacological technology. So it's really fun to look at it and to read the APTA's, the American Physical Therapy Association's white paper on chronic pain and opioid addiction.
yeah,
And you read it, and the things they highlight are exercise, of course, and a little bit about manual therapy, but mostly it's about mindful breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, non-reactivity training, narrative editing, and that. So I think it's just a nice example of where we're starting to see some real merging together that way. I think
that's really beautiful to hear. Yeah, it always is sort of inspiring to hear the ways in which they're finally being integrated, and it seems sort of like common sense now. To many people it's a common sense thing, this connection. So now I want to go into kind of inhabiting different or putting on different hats, as a physical therapist versus the yoga teacher, and from the perspective of physical therapy. Are there any ways that you think yoga teacher trainings, and obviously we know the answer because Diana already spoke a little bit about it, but let's hear more about it. Are there any ways you think yoga teacher trainings need to be modified? Diana, why don't we just hear a little more about your views on this?
I think if we're approaching it from the status of modern postural yoga, and knowing that many of our teacher training graduates are receiving their education in a school that is focused around teaching group classes and maybe even say in a way which kind of feels like group fitness. The concern of my physical therapy perspective is that of safety and reducing risk to the practitioner. I think that what needs to be added into the modern day physical yoga teacher training is clarity in the scope of service, obviously, and a lot of effort put into that. I think offering students a quote anatomy portion, which is what the YA calls it, but I don't think it should be called quote anatomy, right?
What do you think it should be called?
A systems-based awareness of the workings of the body, something like this.
Okay, that's too long of a name, Diana. You're going to have to come up with
You
something.
know, let me get out of the mat hole, and then I'll think
We
about
need
it.
to Twitterize it.
I know, but
I hear what you're saying. It's more like understanding like the functional connections, correct?
yeah. I mean,
Rather than like the hip bones connected to the
No.
thigh bone.
I don't want to meet a teacher who comes in with a playbook of asanas and the muscles and the origins and insertions that are working during those poses. That is absolutely not useful and just not going to keep anyone safe in a class. I think we need to empower these teachers with an understanding of the systems of the body, how the nervous system interacts with the cardiovascular system and the myofascial system, and how these all interact, and unpack the different layers of where these systems, the ranges of these systems. There's a range of normal nervous system and a range of normal musculoskeletal system, understanding basic principles of movement, basic principles of movement, and what, quote, an optimal alignment might look like. Because if we are coming from a group fitness model, we need to talk to the majority, and there are principles that we can look at. Principles to keep us safe. Spinal decompression, not accessory breathing for every time you're doing an ujjayi breath. We need to teach students how to use props as modifications for people who can't get to those poses. And just stepping outside and making it more interactive, including the problem-solving tasks during the quote anatomy, soon to be renamed, component of the yoga teacher training. And I think that this is what the schools are looking for, because we have a foundations model. Well, we call it foundations. There we go. We have our own foundations model that we sort of peddle into yoga therapy schools, or yoga teaching schools. And we're getting more and more requests. And if you're in the Instagram world and you're seeing some of these more creative yoga teachers posting all of their video feeds, you're seeing that there's a need and a push to move toward this model. So it's totally bubbling up. But just like PT, it could be slow to change.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Matthew, on that? What needs to happen in yoga teacher trainings to kind of better reflect the wisdom of the connection between yoga and physical therapy?
Well, kind of going to naming that, for years I've taught what I call relational yoga, or relational anatomy, that there's just relations. And so without slipping too far down in the mat hole,
I'm so sorry.
that's great. I'm going to get a t-shirt. I've been called way worse, Diana. Don't worry about it.
I didn't even think of that. It was
No,
so
I know.
I fell into it. I'm sorry.
But
All right, rein it in, you two.
right, sorry. Yes. Okay, a little slapstick. What's the question? So I think some of the easiest things to do in my work as an expert witness in yoga injuries is that some very foundational risk management training should be part of yoga teacher training, because the things that make it to the level of me being called to be an expert witness is just essentially sheer stupidity. It could be solved by teaching a very elementary level of taking care of being safe, as Diana's saying, the use of props, the identification of students that are at risk, just how you manage if someone has a slip, trip, or fall in your studio. That's not covered, and it's simple. And if you do it right, it keeps the student safe, but it also keeps the practice and the teacher safe, because that's just a horrendous thing when that relationship gets gets harmed that way. And there's very easy fundamental things that could be part of a yoga teacher training that would keep them safe. And Diana and I got to work together on that a couple of years ago, and she did a brilliant job. She's got a great little 7-minute talk on the whole idea. So I think if we could add that plus a relational yoga where you learn not so much the exact parts in that, but the relationship, like Diana was saying, between the spectrum of the nervous system, the spectrum of the anatomy and alignment, and I think the spectrum of the ego psyche, as far as not using props, pushing too hard, or not pushing enough, or that whole, if we could get yoga teachers to see relationships rather than objects, because again, that's our society, is objects, and so that what's the relationship between your frantic student coming in 5 minutes late into class and shoulders up to her ears and having her cell phone go off 2 minutes into her class there, and that it's like, does a yoga teacher understand what the motor state of that person is and what the risks are going to be? Because like you're saying, Diana, if they're all in an accessory breath, they don't have any lower body stability, and so it's again a relationship. How's this yoke or linked to this, and so teaching more relationship rather than just a lot of parts. It's going to be key.
Right. I enjoyed what I was speaking to Zach Dasik for the podcast once, and he was talking about the story of Western anatomy as being related to this, compartmentalized, basically all parts specific and not relational specific, like you're saying, and how this is a story, this is a story that we tell ourselves about the body, and there's an alternative, and of course, then we reflected on those alternatives. So it feels very in resonance with that. Yeah. But it's so ingrained, right? This idea, and I think the perfect thing is what you mentioned, Diana, the myofascial, which is generally in anatomy classes, we just cut through it. It's like the layer that no one pays attention to, or at least historically, and because what's more interesting, right? The attachments in the muscles, and so it seems like we're moving away from that, which is, great news. So now, from the perspective of yoga, are there any ways that traditional physical therapy approaches, or maybe not traditional in the sense of prior to this new, this effect that we're seeing of kind of, the centrality of movement programs like yoga, what, from the perspective of yoga, are there ways that these older approaches have fallen short or are showing themselves to fall short?
I think it's just the largest difference is we take into account that we both agree that the physical therapist that's being groomed right now is changing and evolving into a place that does include more of the mindful pranayama style aspects of the 8 limbs. I think the one difference that you could really split them down the middle is the attachment of yoga to the notion that it is a system for lasting, everlasting change and sustainable lasting change in the whole person. And I don't think that the physical therapy model is rooted in that at all. I think it's, you come into me, you tell me you have a problem, I fix that problem, I see you later. And if there's something else going on with the rest of you, I'll see you when that breaks down, and we'll take care of it. Sort of like an auto mechanic repairman. And I think PT just treats the whole system and is more of on a prevention model, and let's keep you safe all the time as opposed to fixing you when you break down.
Right. And isn't there, the only time I ever went to a physical therapist, I actually had, it was from, I think it was a yoga related injury in my hip or in my knee, I can't quite remember. But the response also was just sort of localized to the place where I felt I had the physical experience, right? There was no sort of thought towards, my gait or any other kind of thing like that. It was sort of like, so is that also like a characteristic of, this sort of what we might call the traditional idea of physical therapy, is that, like, if you feel the pain here, you do something here, rather than seeing a kind of more holistic perspective?
It depends on where the PT. It
Right.
depends 100% on the school they graduate from and the continuing education that they choose to take and the clinic that they work in and who's watching them and how many patients they're treating at once. Depends on so many factors. I would love to tell you that it's changing across the board in terms of that, but I don't feel convinced. I'm in New York. I think most people in New York are evolving, but I don't know what it's like in
But
other
there are
parts
some
of the
dinosaurs
country.
out there.
Oh my God, dinosaurs. Serious. Yeah, they'll just mobilize your hip all day long and give you some heat and stim. And that makes me, it just makes my blood boil.
All right, Matthew. So what do you think about that from the about traditional kind of physical therapy approaches, or what do we learn from the perspective of yoga?
Well, I think part of it is in that rehab, the creativity and rehab textbook that we did. My buddy, and Diana knows him, Stefan Elkelid. He's a Feldenkrais practitioner and a yoga therapist and a PT. But he wrote a chapter on the systems things that are slowing creativity in rehab, and particularly in PT. And so much of it is test oriented towards they have so much to teach the students within a certain amount of time and resources, and the test is slow to evolve. It takes 3 to 5 years to get a new test question in. It's very expensive to just change a single question. And it has to reflect literature that's been out for a long time. And so there's all these systems things, and he did a brilliant job in the chapter on it. And so there's all these structural things that are slowing down the process that nobody really wants, but they're just there. And then the PT schools, if they try to put this new stuff in, but if their pass rate on the national exam goes down, then students don't come to their school, and those are all published, and so then they don't get the money, so it's an interesting systemic flywheel of relationship that way. By the same token, the yoga teachers have kind of the same thing, and it's important between the two worlds maybe to understand that a 200-hour yoga teacher training means you had 200 contact hours. Mm-hmm. When Diana and I took a 16 or 18-hour semester, that was 3 hours a week, or 3 times a week for 16 weeks that we, so we're talking a couple thousand hours versus, and so how does the yoga world deal with that time, literal time crunch of only 200 contact hours versus say a whole semester of 48 hours of contact for just a single 3-hour class. So so both systems need to recognize this, and then be compassionate about it, but still work like heck to try and make it better. Right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I appreciate the thoughts on the 200 hour, because I always think of, I one time noticed that the Insight Meditation School of meditation, like their whole training program to become a meditation teacher, not that meditation isn't complicated, of course, and that there aren't many things to learn, but it's a 4-year program. Like, you don't become a teacher until 4 years, and that's meditation, and then we have yoga, which is 200 hours. You can finish it in a month immersion. And, arguably there are more moving parts, literally, in an asana, related training than a meditation training. So just like there's some kind of profound disconnect, right? It just seems so unbelievable that and also it seems to cheapen the practice of teaching yoga by having this kind of paradigm of 200 hours makes you a teacher.
Absolutely.
So let's move in. Well, let's change gears a little bit, shift gears a little bit to injuries, questions about injuries, because of course you're a physical therapist, so you have lots of cool information about injuries. So what are the most common injuries that we see in yoga practitioners, and how can physical therapy insights help us with these injuries? Do you want to start, Diana?
Yeah. I kind of don't like this question
Okay.
Because I think that,
Can you tell me why?
yeah, because I think anything can be injured from
Right.
doing yoga. Um, Anything can be injured from doing anything physically speaking. Um, it's not the yoga that always hurts you. It's one of the 3 or 4 systems that we named before, whether it's your ego, your
Yeah.
nervous system, your predisposition to your musculoskeletal system, or your cardiovascular system being ineffective. So all that being said, I think people hurt their shoulders a lot because there's too
Yeah.
many chaturangas, and wrists a lot, and knees a lot because they don't have hip mobility. Um, but those are the pushing people, right? What are the hypomobile people, the people who are kind of standing in class and are unenthused, or at the sort of dorsal end of the vagal spectrum. Those are the people who may get injured from low tone and not being as forceful with their poses, and might move through an endpoint that they shouldn't move through into their hypermobility. What can we do? I think we do what we said we would do in terms of changing the way that the yoga teacher training would change. And that's coming back to the relationships and the systems-based model of understanding the way that the human person works.
Hmm.
And maybe we rethink it that way.
And also, it seems like part of that would also be, aligned with what you're saying about. Um, I appreciate you pointing out that, I I feel like what you're saying is a variation on, the practice doesn't hurt the person hurts the person, or the
Yeah,
person's sort of temperament, or approach to practice is what kind of cultivates the dysfunction. Um, and so it seems like then what would also be a part of the training would be to have some kind of training around temperament, or
yeah,
cultivating an attitude towards practice that isn't so sort of like push, 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 push,
yeah,
which I do think, sometimes the way that the spirituality gets articulated can encourage that, right?
yeah,
Because there's this sense of like getting out, getting beyond, like really like accessing these sort of like extreme experiences of awareness that, that sort of again are harken back to the kind of, man standing in tree pose for 7 years in order to access enlightenment, right?
yeah,
So it seems like there's also this kind of necessary component of I don't know, attitude adjustment, for
yeah.
lack of a better word.
I think it's a combination of, quote, reading the room, right?
Mm.
So I've been to a Kula yoga class at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday
I love
afternoon
Kula.
that Skylar taught 12 years ago, and it's like, let's
Yeah.
push the pedal to the metal across the board. Everyone's slipping and falling off their mats, and it's intense. And so if you're that yoga teacher, read the room, understand where your students are coming from, try to get a tap into that mentality, the group mentality, and try to drive everybody back to the middle. Take that fight or flight response that's in your students, and they're ready to come in and push it out, and maybe bring them back to a rest and digest parasympathetic state before you jump into a movement practice. So maybe try to drive the movement train moving with awareness first. Tap them in, create the sense of embodiment in the student before you ask them to move. Feel the
Mm.
foot before you step it back into lunge. Maybe then that might create a safer environment.
Yeah. Nice. So what are your thoughts, Matthew? I'm sure you have a lot.
Well, pilot higher and deeper, right? Um, Actually, we had a fun experience this past year at the American Physical Therapy Association's combined section meeting. Sherry Betts and I, she's a physical therapist and a Pilates expert, osteoporosis Pilates expert. She and I presented an all-day conference for physical therapists to go back into their communities for bone safe yoga. That was
Mm.
the title of it. You know, because it's interesting when we look at the two professions, we've got the yoga people want to get into the insurance deal and want to get part of the insurance and want to be part of all this sort of thing. And the PTs are going, God, I wish I could get out of insurance, and I wish I could do cash based like those yoga teachers do. And they know how to market, and I don't know how to market. So what we did was we based the course around this, and this I guess would advocate to our listeners, whether you're a PT or a yogi, is go out and meet the other, and set up a symbiotic relationship between each other. Learn what they're doing, share what you're doing, do workshops in each other's space, go to each other's services. It's all part of that. But I think, because yes, as PTs, we can show them so much about maintaining good movement, safety and control, and identifying imbalances. By the same token, the yoga teachers know how to set up the depth of relationship where people come over and over every week, maybe a couple times a week, and give you cash. And so it's like, oh yeah, that's a good deal. So, and I think one of the things that Diana's not going to bring it up, right? Because it's what they do, but the creativity that they are showing with, they take TheraBand and different ways of using classical PT tools, and yet they make very embodied awareness connections. And I think if we started fusing more of that creative mix between the two, because I haven't been to one of your trainings, but I look at the pictures and I watch the short video clips and the stuff. People are learning, they get excited. I mean, isn't that the case, what you've seen, Diana?
That is the case, and it's amazing, and it's the brainchild of one of our teachers, Julia Klein, and she's amazing at it. And it's bridging the gap, and that's really inspired people. And you could do it across the board with all props, but I think the interesting thing is we do that. Part of our training is to implant the yoga teachers into a physical therapy setting and have them do observation, because when you come to break it down, we speak a different language than the yoga teacher. And it's just flat out different. And so much of my 100 hours that we've developed is just, can we all try to understand the same words and the same language? And that will bridge that gap back and forth. I don't think this was the question. But,
no, that's okay. I like where
Yeah.
we're going. So with on that question of kind of, I guess, verbiage, is in the context of the training, is that part of the discussion, is sort of like, how can you modify this physical therapy language to fit a group class?
Yes, that's the harder part.
Right.
The easier part is to empower the yoga teachers with words like sagittal and transverse, and understand prone and supine and the physical therapy style words. The harder part is to take the art of the yoga movements and translate it into something more physical therapy inclined. And you need a very highly skilled person to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in a lot of classes that, where I feel like the teacher just stepped out of their anatomy, advanced studies course, and they are literally just trying to flaunt their, sophisticated knowledge. And it's so overboard, it's so much detail that it's alienating. There's this and especially in New York, where everyone wants to be the smartest one in the room.
Yeah.
You have this. They just want to show off their nuanced knowledge of the sacroiliac joint or the rotator cuff, and it's like, I don't care. I just want to have an experience. And so I guess that's one of the questions is that I was thinking about this earlier, is that how do you, because of course we want to be safe, and I think most students when they go to a yoga class are going for some level of fitness, or a sense of ease in the body, and also ease in the mind, of course, is part of it, or a huge part of it. But they're also going to, classes are very much built around an experience. They're not a physical therapy session. They're not a medical interaction. They're very, there's pretty music, there's a violist in the corner, there's like beautiful, Hindu deities up front for me to relate to. So, how do we, as teachers trying to impart this deeper understanding of the body, how do we also do that while not forgetting that people are also coming for a kind of experience?
Yeah, it's a true merging of practices, I find. There's the way that the classes work is you walk in and there's a conversation about the principles of physical therapy that we're going to integrate into the flow that we're going to work on. So if you're in a hip preservation class, you might get a little bit of understanding of the hip joint and why the hip joint is sometimes in danger in yoga, and some of the principles that we can learn and put into practice that might protect it. And then, yeah, you're going to get onto the mat and you're going to do some isolation style exercises that you can Google and pick out that are going to be done with a level of kinesthetic awareness that are a bit deeper than you'll get in traditional physical therapy. So you might be doing some core activations, some breathing, some hip exercises, some understanding of the centralizing of the hip joint. And then those principles, those underlying principles, get woven in as sort of the theme of the class. And that in itself will hopefully get you to that level of embodiment, kinesthetic awareness, mindfulness, and integrating the pranayama. And of course, non-traditional dharma, and ending with the shavasana. Yeah, that is the model.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to kind of wrap it up here because we've now gone on for about an hour, which is totally okay. But I want to get to questions. So for those of you who are still with us, looks like there are almost about 20 of you. So if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. I see a couple of questions now, which I'm going to turn to after I ask this last question. So go ahead, and if you do have comments or questions, just go ahead and share them, and then I'll moderate them for Diana and Matthew. I think when I mentioned that before, you couldn't hear me. So there you go. Share your questions. So my last question, and I definitely wanted to get to it, Matthew, since you are so connected to IAYT, which is, what are the motivations behind Yoga Alliance cracking down on the use of words like yoga therapist, and how do you feel about those changes? So Matthew, with your connection to the Yoga Therapists organization, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are relief because we've got a new executive director at Yoga Alliance and a lot of new board members, and there's been a wonderful dialogue initiated between the two boards of directors. Each have been at their respective meetings. There's a lot of sharing going on that's saying that was kind of an awkward, clumsy rollout of a policy that is now being rethought and reworked. So it's very much in this huge strategic do-over that they're doing at the Yoga Alliance. So luckily that's being addressed now, because it was, I helped found Yoga Alliance. I did their first website back in 1999. And I was number 42. That was my membership number. But when that rolled out, I quit. I just said, wow, this isn't what I thought we were creating. So I'm really excited, and I want listeners to understand, because the Alliance is going to be coming forward, lots of focus group, lots of input, and lots of collaboration. And I think maybe the most exciting thing there, so, you do a bad asana practice and all of a sudden you learn a lot about yourself, right? That clumsy asana, that rollout has now opened up to a new board, and so the Alliance has split off their nonprofit that's going to be doing a lot of incredible social activism. I didn't get to hear the first of your series of lectures, but there's a big pot of money there that's going to be to fund and support this real yoga coming into environments. So, and between that, yoga therapists, we just started a whole social activism, community-based health program. And so those therapists will be able to bid for grants for the money from the Yoga Alliance. And so now we're seeing this really wonderful thing. So thank God that's a little bit of an old news story, Jacob. So
yeah, because this is news to me actually, that there is sort of a modification happening. But for those that are kind of newer to this story, what was the problem? I mean, first of all, what motivated Yoga Alliance to do this? And then, and then what was the issue that you're now speaking of, that you're sort of, you're coming from the position of a sort of critique of that. So what are those two, issues?
So, and again, I wasn't part of this process, so it's all hearsay what I'm saying, but it was largely, they rolled out without any context or introduction this prohibition of the use of yoga therapy as a term, which was driven by legal counsel within their organization because of the liability it exposes both the teacher but also the organization. And if the organization is saying, you can do yoga to cure your diabetes or your hypertension and someone gets harmed, it always goes to the deepest pockets, and so it comes back. And so there was a protectionism kind of, and so they came out and said, if, like in my case, I couldn't say I was a yoga therapist. And it's like, really? And so that's what, I had to take everything off my website, not just what I had on my Yoga Alliance page, but what I had on my website as well. Then they kind of stepped back and said, well, you can say something, but it was just really an awkward, clumsy process in order to protect the organization. And now in their rethinking, I think we're going to see that there's going to be a middle ground there. And I don't know what that's going to be at this point.
I see. Okay, cool. Interesting. And then, Diana, do you want to remark on that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't think I have a whole lot to add to that conversation. I think Matt's got his finger on the pulse. Yeah.
Yeah, that's no problem. Yeah. I think, he wrapped it up pretty good. Okay, yeah. So now let's look at a couple of the questions that we have here. Let me just, why is this not letting me scroll? Gosh, more technical problems. Okay. Okay, so from Molly, sorry, there we go. Oh, great. Okay, great. Now I can scroll. So from Mary Lane, are there any particular cautions other than listening to your body that you tell older people based on your experience seeing many clients and perhaps certain injuries or strains being more common as we age? Either one.
Okay.
So basically thoughts, on, aging, basically, like what are, Mary Lane uses the word cautions, but maybe like best practices for practitioners as they age.
Yeah, well, it's bogus to tell a student, well, just stay where you're comfortable or stay with your breath. That's almost meaningless to most students. So that's not sufficient at all. Again, in the yoga training, there should be relational information giving, like, if women over 50 have a higher risk for osteoporotic fracture, so you have to do things that are safe and sustain balance and avoid the postures that are contraindicated for that, because you don't know which of every other female student is that person. And then visual changes. Obviously, if they're talking about an older population, you have to understand that they're not particularly going to be able to see or have as good a vision. So again, bringing in more props, getting against the walls, using chairs, modifying that if you're in an older age group. And then the other big category is cardiovascular health. Do you understand about inversions with hypertension, and do you understand what happens to the heart rate if they're on a beta blocker? And, luckily there's a silver generation that's seeking out yoga, but with them they come with a whole set of different precautions. And So I would say, seek more training. There's facts, and there's one of the cases that I had. The teacher said there's nothing special. 70 is 50, and 50 is 40, and there's no risk. There's no problems with that. And it's like, no, sorry. And this person was also a certified personal trainer, and it's like, no, that's not true. and with some simple instruction, it can make a difference.
Diana, you have thoughts on that question?
I agree with Matt said. I don't think I can add much except that you have to respect the physiology of the human and that there are degenerative changes that occur whether we want to embrace them or not. And so around that, there should be caution.
Well, maybe a more kind of pointed question would be like, given issues around bone density as we age, are there particular functional movements that are more potentially harmful?
Potentially, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have to be very aware. You could have someone walk in with a borderline osteoporotic bone mass, bone density, and you would do your due diligence to be very careful with postures that involve lots of twisting, where you're asking the spine to move into a range that is not attainable through normal range of motion for that person. Also knowing that there could be arthritic changes in knees or hips, and being careful not to go into end ranges and force those deep postures like a virasana or a pigeon pose in the classes. And understanding how we can maybe help those people with osteoporotic or lower bone mass by introducing the idea of more standing, more weight-bearing postures where bone is being loaded and therefore being forced to strengthen or maintain strength during the classes.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look to the question. The question is from Molly. Okay, she has two questions. The first one is, what are best practices for a yoga instructor to go about connecting and integrating with a PT to teach classes, courses, and workshops? It's kind of a practical, kind of networking question.
Sure. I think Matt touched on some of those interesting items before. Walking yourself into the clinic and offering maybe a free short workshop on explaining what yoga is, or if you have a group class or a private client or a participant in your group class who comes up to you and says, hey, I've been seeing a physical therapist for my knee and this is what they say, you could start up a conversation and say, well, who's your physical therapist? I'd be happy to reach out to them. Maybe we could talk a little bit about your case, and then maybe through that you can forge a relationship and go from there. Inviting PTs to come to your class, getting to know other medical professionals, putting yourself out there and sharing what you know and what you do as a yoga teacher. They're all great tools. Yeah.
And also being okay with saying, I don't know.
Yeah,
so when the student
totally
comes up and says, what should I be doing? I know I tore my meniscus, but I think it's pretty much better. It's okay for the yoga teacher to go, I don't know, but, I have a PT friend. Let me, let's get you guys connected and let's the three of us talk about this and we'll all learn. So the mantra of I don't know is a powerful one, and it instills trust in the teacher and in the therapist. And so it's a good.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I mean, I sort of think that it would be a really great practice for yoga teachers to start having sort of a list of, referrals, because, or in their, I don't know, in their little pocketbook or whatever they bring around to take notes in or keep notes in or numbers in, just to have, what are the go-to, like massage therapists, all a whole list of essentially people that they refer their students to when they get questions like that. And this is actually harkening back to a conversation that we had last week about the healing and actually the pressure on a teacher that I think we're moving away from which is this pressure that a lot of teachers feel that they should know everything, and the way in which students approach their yoga teachers as if they know everything about the body, when obviously, as we know from this conversation, they largely don't. I won't say largely, but in many cases, in many instances, they don't, and they feel this pressure to sort of give some kind of advice, because if they don't, then they're going to be seen as less than a qualified yoga teacher or something like that. So anyway, it's interesting, and would be good to kind of have that back to that conversation about specialized relationships and communication. So another question from Molly Jorgensen, hi Molly, is how does one go about obtaining grant funding from Yoga Alliance to create/promote social activism projects in their community? Does Yoga Alliance give funding?
Well, they just literally separated the two organizations. They're 501(c) and the other one, and so that's coming. So you can look for that to come forward. It's just getting going. So get on their newsletter and follow them on Facebook. And as that comes forward, it's not. I mean, literally, they just finally got it sawed apart. So so it's coming. So stay tuned. It's coming.
All right, stay tuned. Yeah, keep checking back on that website.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you so much, you two. Do either of you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share based on any of the things that we've discussed? Crickets.
Well, I appreciate you bringing this conversation forward, Jacob. Because I think it's so rich for both professions to interact. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. No, it's my pleasure. And I apologize to those out there who tried to listen at the beginning and you couldn't hear. All you missed was the promotional bit and then the first 5 seconds of Diana speaking, but we'll go ahead and re-edit the video so that it's not so we don't have so much of that empty airtime. But I will just mention the things that I did mention before when we were doing the initial introduction. So coming up in next week, actually, we have two courses happening. One is Yogini, the iconography and philosophy of Yoginis and divine feminine power. So this is a kind of historical look at the philosophy and the tradition of the Yoginis as they're found in the tantric traditions of India and Nepal. And then there's another course that starts next Tuesday. You can get more information at embodiedphilosophy.com/yogini. And then the other course is called Tibetan Buddhism, A Path of Becoming Fully Human. And that's a 4-week online course that introduces the philosophy, the history, the practices of Tibetan Buddhism. It's being taught by Dr. Miles Neal. And you can find out more about that at embodiedphilosophy.com/Tibetan. So thank you so much, everyone, and thank you again to Matthew and Diana for sharing their time and their expertise and their knowledge and their wisdom for all of us in the virtual world. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Matthew.